Most of the critique aimed at the new Fallout Amazon show revolves around the fact that the show is not lore accurate. If this is what stops you from watching this show, you're fucking stupid. I genuinely have no better way to express this.
You know how in D&D you can like max out intelligence but not wisdom?
Yeah,
That's him.
Fallout is some of the best television I have seen in recent years, and discarding it over some baseless Twitter discourse somehow really upsets me. Without going too much into detail, I was really surprised at how much hate this show is getting. A lot, and I mean a lot of people are saying this show somehow ruined the franchise and that it is the prime example of how Bethesda ruined Fallout. This bunch has a pretty big overlap with people that want to pretend this show is quote-unquote woke modern garbage that doesn't understand its source material, and I get it. Let's be frank, there are a lot of shows, movies, and video games that feature a main female protagonist that also happen to unfortunately have some really bad writing. Do you remember the all-female Ghostbusters? Because I do, and it was really bad. And let's face it, it had more to do with pushing an ideological agenda rather than presenting a good story.
You know what? For all that's worth, accurate fighting scene between a man and a woman so far.
yeah, real.
They're not making her a Mary Sue, she's getting a fucking beating.
Let me be clear when I say this, Fallout is not one of these cases. It's an incredible show, and this video will be diving into both the accuracy and fidelity of the show to its source material, and later on how Fallout is one of the best TV shows to have been released in recent memory. Small warning, spoilers ahead, so if you haven't watched the show first, I highly encourage you to save the video somewhere, go watch the show, and come back later.
Uh-oh.
That's not Bambi.
That's not Bambi.
That's not Bambi.
The lore of the show is fine, it's really not that bad, but I want to first say that I understand the frustration. There is a 15-year window between the events of Fallout New Vegas and Fallout the TV show, and even a bigger gap between the events of the first games and the show. That is really small. When I first watched the show, at the very end, I thought it was set easily 100 years, if not 200 years in the future, after Fallout New Vegas. 15 years is a really small time frame for a lot of important events to have happened. While there are genuine comments that can be made about the show, I do think the benefit of the doubt needs to be given for a lot of these things.
And every night I was driving myself crazy, imagining the worst. So
That sounds
you
like
do not need to tell
gaslighting,
me how
girlie.
bad war
Yeah,
is.
exactly.
You're a
Every day I
gaslight.
go into
You are
work and I
gaslighting,
think
girl
about
bossing,
how
and
humanity can
gatekeeping.
survive.
A comment I saw earlier this week had to do with the total absence of any reference to Caesar's Legion from Fallout New Vegas. The news of a mass-scale invasion like the one that happened at Hoover Dam would have had plenty of time to spread to California. And yet I saw nothing that referenced these events in the show that appears to be a genuine plot hole, one that can and will probably be addressed in the second season. We'll go over why I believe this is the case later on in the video. What isn't a fair comment is, why is the NCR now a raider-like institution? To which I have to say, have you seen the fucking show? The only things they mention is how Shady Sands was the capital of the NCR and how it got blown up. The few scenes we have with the NCR shows them in very selective frames. We know the NCR has a president, we know he holds some sort of power too, we know the Republic has deals with some raiders, but this isn't anything new. The NCR has had a lot of shady shit going on in the games also. What's even more telling is that for almost every single scene the NCR shows up, someone or something mentions the fact that they are the government. This is quite literally the show telling you the NCR is still the known government of the United States West Coast. We know from New Vegas that they are on the verge of collapse, and it is completely fair to believe that the series displays a slowly crumbling republic. This is something that Caesar touches on also in the game. There is precedent for it in the lore. I don't understand why people are making such a big fuss over it, since we haven't even seen them in a proper way yet.
You never heard of the New California Republic?
What we have seen so far is the Brotherhood of Steel, and oh boy, has this rustled the jimmies of a few neckbeards. The Brotherhood in the TV show is totally fine, and you know why? Because the Brotherhood of Steel isn't some linear, monolithic organization. It's surprisingly similar to Christianity and the different denominations of Christian religions. The Brotherhood has the same guiding principles and agrees to follow the common teachings and rules of these principles, but how they act on them is totally different from one chapter to another. The Lost Hills Brotherhood of Steel, founded by Roger Maxson that we see in Fallout 1, operates very differently from the Mojave chapter. And you know why? Because there's 200 years between the formation of the two. Of course they will be different. The fact that some people are getting butthurt about the fact that the chapter of the Brotherhood of Steel we see in the show, which is inferred but never confirmed to be the Lost Hills chapter, by the way, is different from the ones from the games, baffles me. There are 200 years of history there. You think it's out of proportion to believe they developed a more religious approach? Really? I mean, they are mostly secular in the games, but Scott Campbell, the guy who wrote the story of Fallout 1 and 2, has said before that the Brotherhood was intentionally supposed to be a more religious order. If this proves anything, it's the fact that the writers for the show dug really fucking deep to find out some important lore bits they could use as an inspiration. The fact that the Brotherhood has more religious practices in the show isn't a disservice to the world of Fallout, it's a love letter.
Well, I tell you what, boys. Whenever somebody says they're doing one last job, that usually means their heart's not in it. Probably never was. But for me, well, I do this shit for the love of the game.
There's, I don't know if I love it or hate it. There's so many hard ass lines. It's crazy. Every time they end a sequence to switch to another character, they end on this deep ass like philosophical quote, and it sticks, and it's like, oh my god.
So I think
Then you
that's
get
like...
to the 25th one, and you're like, Jesus Christ, my boy is still doing it.
Another point of contention is, as I mentioned before, the fact that a lot of people believe this show is supposedly woke, whatever the fuck that word means nowadays. Not here to make political commentary, but the woke/red pill dichotomy really doesn't do justice to this show. Believe me, I'm the first one that will spit on some artwork that seeks to simply and only pander to an audience for monetary gain, Marvel being the first. But again, this doesn't apply to Fallout, and I'm not sure why people try to hate this show, especially through that lens. This post by Mech Crow Comics is perhaps the best point I can jump from. First off, the show is not set in the 1950s, it's set 200 years later after the bombs dropped, which was in 1977. Race mixing is a really weird thing to point out. This is the west coast of the United States. The US is predicated on being a melting pot, and the West Coast is the place where, historically, a lot of different races have shown up to better their lives. White, blacks, Hispanics, and everything in between. The Vaults being neighbors is a huge plot point in the show, and it's not new. The games have always made Vault Tech to be inhumane bastards that experimented on people. Vault dwellers aren't casual about incest, they see it as a huge problem. But they finally tackle a big question that was never answered in the games.
Messing around with your cousin, it's all well and good for kids, but it's not a sustainable long-term sexual practice, you know?
Yep, sounds about right. It's actually true.
Yeah.
They've been in vaults for like 200 years. Like, yeah.
How do you stop people that live underground for hundreds of years from becoming inbred? This is a genuinely interesting question, and the show has a great answer for it. In Vault 33, it's prohibited because it might interfere with Reclamation Day. The person of color, girl boss, raider, queen in question here is Moldaver, and this is extremely reductive of her character. Moldaver fights against the system that Vault-Tec is putting into place. She's a scientist that wishes to create cold fusion in order to power up the wasteland indefinitely. She is not a raider insofar as she raided Vault 33 to get a hold of Henry to start up the cold fusion process. The fact that she's a person of color is irrelevant. I mean, it's probably cool for the people who identify with her, I guess, but I genuinely do not care unless it is made important for her character writing. As for the Brotherhood of Steel, we've covered this, but one part is really interesting to me. The mention about trans people. It's quite funny to me when people mention this. There is one side character who happens to be transgender in the show, and it's made pretty evident without pushing it down your throat. The Fallout games have always touched on sex and gender. Even in Fallout 1, the character of Sally is a genuinely interesting look into what happens to these people in the universe. Fallout 2 was the first mainstream game to feature same-sex marriage. I'm sorry to say, buddy, but if you're looking for no LGBT stuff, you are in the wrong franchise, my friend. I think the show handles it really well, and since it doesn't try to shove it down anyone's throat, it's much more palatable for mainstream audiences. All this to say that this post is garbage and a great example of why Twitter is a cesspool. But it's not like I don't have any bits and pieces I dislike about the show. I think there's some scenes that are simply unnecessary. The toilet humor, I can take or leave it, but I mainly chalk it up to the fact that this is the first season of the show. Not even The Sopranos or Breaking Bad had their identity fully realized from the get-go. Another point I really agree with is the last shot of the show, with the city of New Vegas being very different from what it used to be. No monorail, no airstrip, no gunrunners, nothing. Even then, it seems like the city itself is pretty desolate, as if something destroyed it, although in the game it appears New Vegas was the one constant in an ever-changing Mojave. Call it coping, maybe too much good faith, but I believe this will be touched upon in the second season of the show. It's clearly something that needs to be addressed, and seeing as though the team behind this show showed proficiency and competency, I'm ready to suspend my disbelief for now. A big thing I saw some comments on is the tendency of Bethesda to never let the world really rebuild itself in the wasteland.
So that's when you literally decide to bomb Shady Sands. So that's canon, actually. Now that's canon. Interesting.
The nuking of Shady Sands is the best example of this, as it served as a bastion of civilization in the original Fallout games, as a starting point to the reclamation of the world, and nuking it can be interpreted as the writers not wanting to deal with the impacts of an organized society functioning normally. The point being that Fallout is more of an aesthetic package that you can slap on something, but fails to deliver if it's not within the framework of a desolate wasteland with no hope. This is actually a valid point to make, but I don't believe it to be true. I think it has much more to do with the fact that Fallout is a story in any form, game, or show about the relationship of chaos and order in a post-apocalyptic world. When you take into consideration that the TV show attempts to bring a very complex, very dense world to mainstream audiences, I think The Fall of Shady Sands makes this a great starting point to introduce this concept to people. This was the capital of the foremost form of government in the wasteland, and even though it happens to be a bastion of order, it is not immune to war and its chaos.
Everyone wants to save the world, they disagree on how.
Speaking of bringing the world of Fallout to mainstream audiences, I think this is a great time to talk about what the show does great. Holy shit, how refreshing of a video game adaptation is this show? We can honestly complain all day, but after The Last of Us, this is a welcome change. I genuinely did not know who Jonathan Nolan was and what he did prior to this show, so I went in blind until I cracked and checked him out on IMDb.
Who the fuck is Jonathan Nolan?
This is where I come clean. I went into this show with as little faith as possible. I thought this was going to be some honest garbage, but I was willing to watch it to see how bad it was. It's an understatement to say that I was shocked by how great every single element of the show is. I'm going to be gushing now, so bear with me, but if you agree or disagree with any of these points, please let me know in the comments.
I'm Lucy. Do you have a name?
Oh no, he's hot! First off, the score. The music in this show is nuts! Coming from the composer of Game of Thrones, I expected a lot of Fallout-esque songs. You know, 1950s, 1960s song with a Midwestern/Western twist to them. What I didn't expect is the supporting songs. The theme for the Brotherhood of Steel and the songs around the Ghoul are some of my favorites. The sound design of the Ghoul especially struck me as inspired by Dune, but maybe that's reaching a bit, or not, I'm really unsure. What I am sure about is that it's thematic, it's subtle, it's representative of the content of the world, and catchy enough to really immerse you into the experience. The music and sound design are top-notch, and I have nothing else to add on that front, except that I'm a huge fan.
You got fucked up. That's not happening.
Oh, I fucking love that sound.
They have some really good sound design.
I think the casting is next level. There are some risks associated with some of these picks, I'm not gonna lie. Dave Register, who plays Chet? Let's say that The Witch Files isn't what sold me on his acting chops, okay? Let's be fucking real. I recognized the Johnny Pemberton from 21 and 22 Jump Street, but I was expecting him to have much more of a funny role. Turns out he can be plenty dramatic, but I think his role is just right for him. I had never heard of Moises Arias, the guy who plays Norm, who we called the Rat pretty much the whole way through the show, but man, he delivers a fucking great performance. The last episode especially, I think he does exceptionally well. All that to say, the supporting cast was a gamble in my opinion, but it worked out perfectly. As for the main characters, let's be real, Walton Goggins was gonna be the highlight of this show no matter what happened. I remember him from The Hateful Eight, and he is just as good as he was in that.
Well,
That's cold. That's cold. The bottle caps are like cash, right? He just threw a bunch of he literally just cash on the ground.
He plays his role just right with just enough bravado to fit exactly where he needs to be in the world of the show. Ella Purnell does great. I really haven't watched anything with her in it beforehand, but I think she's a perfect fit for Lucy.
Fun.
It's fine as a bug.
I love that she has these like okie dokie nuggets of hug.
By far, though, I think the most stellar performance in the show is Maximus, played by Aaron Moten. Holy fucking shit, this guy can act. It's absolutely fucking criminal that this is essentially his breakout performance. Like, he played in Fathers 2 and Emancipation, but who gives a shit? He played his heart out in this, and it shows. Aaron makes me think of a young Denzel Washington. He has the same facial expressions and ways of acting, but with just enough novelty that it feels distinct.
Oh, he has that Denzel Washington. He's so good.
Damn.
He's such a good actor.
Aaron just straight up murders his performance and sells the character of Maximus right until the very end of the show. It's high praise, but he deserves all of it. Props to him big time. Of course, good casting doesn't immediately make for a good piece of media, but thankfully the character writing is goated. Obviously, the three main characters are where the money is at. Maximus, Lucy, and the Ghoul are all extremely compelling characters with full backstories and adequate reactions to their environments. I personally really like the evolution of Lucy throughout the show. Her loss of innocence in the wasteland is one hell of a performance, and even though she is willing to change how she acts for the sake of saving her father, she still holds on to her core beliefs all the way through. It acts as a certainty in the show, much like how a bass line drives a song. If Lucy is a bass line, Maximus is most likely the drums. He punctuates the storyline with his moral ambiguity and his struggle to become a good person.
Toodles, you, sir, are a scholar and a gentleman. You should be commended.
Oh my god, he's the Reddit. He's the Reddit character.
I see the Ghoul as a lead melody, like a guitar riff or a powerful synth. You genuinely never know what the fuck he's gonna do, and every time he's on screen, the only constant you will have is the fact that he is going to be awesome. As for Norm, I'm not quite sure. Like maybe the backing vocals or something, since his part of the story supports the main one. It's yo, they should fucking call me Jack Reacher, brother. Fuck off, dude. I don't know anymore. Quick side note on the story, by the way, I thought it was really clever. The whole way through the big reveal that Moldaver does at the end of the show, I was certain that the chip was some sort of Gek, like that storyline in Fallout 3 with the water purifier in Vault 112. It subverted my expectations, and I was really pleased with the conclusion regarding the cold fusion reactor. It's the perfect ending to Moldaver's storyline, and it sets up a potential conflict and or reappearance of the NCR as a prominent part of the world in later seasons, wink wink nudge nudge, for the future. By far though, the greatest achievement that Fallout manages to do during its runtime is adapting the world building and lore of the games into a manageable experience for a series. I think a lot of players forget how restrictive a televised medium can be. It allows for more liberty than a movie or a trilogy, that's for sure, but it's far from being as open to interpretation and experience as a game is. A TV show is tailored for the medium, making an open world game like Fallout, which usually has multiple endings depending on your choices, into a single 8-episode show is pretty damn impressive. Remember when I said we'd go back to Caesar's Legion? Yeah, this is the moment. We can't expect everything from every single prior game to show up in this show. It's 8 episodes, for God's sake. Of course some things are gonna be cut. And it's fine, because otherwise we'd get overloaded with useless information that doesn't add much to the story anyway, but it is something that I believe will be addressed later on. Fallout has the potential to run for several seasons, so I think a little hope goes a long way here.
Oh, what about the fucking cock
Yeah, what
explosion?
about making his cod explode? Yeah. I mean, that can still happen.
Perchance.
Mayhaps.
The fact that we got to see multiple factions from the games, the general state of the wasteland 200 years later after the bombs dropped, a ton of callbacks to the previous games, energy and regular weapons, probably the best power armor suit design put to screen, it must have taken a shit ton of time to properly make everything. Just the location choice for shooting the various shots of the show is insane to me. I don't think it's perfect, but man, we've come a long way from the Tomb Raider movies. It's pretty funny how fast people forget. Only a few years ago, the best video game adaptation we had was Warcraft, and that was 2016. That's 8 years ago. Before that, video game movies were gimmicks that tried to cash grab on a particular audience as fast as possible. Do you remember the Hitman movie? No, you fucking don't. Stop lying. And even if you did, it's garbage, and you know it. Having a movie, let alone an entire TV show of this quality based on a video game, is a dream come true. And to me, this is where the crux of the matter is. Fallout might genuinely be the piece of media that makes producers and executives aware of the potential that video game worlds have when adapted to television shows. The Last of Us had a pretty good run, but I genuinely believe it fell short. It didn't manage to deliver on its promise. People were expecting a port of the story almost one-to-one, and it got completely transformed as a different thing during its runtime. Fallout doesn't do that. It manages to be a focused, condensed piece of media that does its best to represent the world of Fallout in the most accurate way possible. It's not perfect, but it's damn near it, and the fact that it could kickstart a small revolution in television shows, much like Warcraft did for movies, is no small feat and needs to be properly understood as much. For all of these qualities, Fallout receives an extremely solid 9 out of 10 score from me. It's the best TV show based off of a video game we've had so far, and I am extremely excited to see what's to come. If you too want to keep up with the next seasons, I will be reviewing them, so please feel free to like and subscribe for more. Thank you for watching.